Hello everyone and welcome to the latest This Week in the Field. I'm Dustin, and as we've done in the last couple weeks, I'm going to cover what I did over the past week to give you guys a better idea of exactly how a week goes for me and my jobs, my prices. Now, I'll start off by saying this was a slow week. I had two factors that kind of made this week a little bit slower. The first one was at the end of last week, right after I recorded the last This Week in the Field, I had an issue with my truck. Haven't had a whole lot of problems with my truck. I haven't had any issues with my truck since I bought it in 2023. However, this week I had a big problem with my truck. And the issue was that I started to get a service transmission light, and because of that, over the weekend, instead of when I was trying to create my schedule for the week, I realized I needed to make sure I got time to get my truck into the shop. Now, my issue is that my truck is my means of transportation when it comes to not only home life, but also work life. And that becomes a problem because if I don't have the truck because the truck's in the shop, then I can't really go to work. I've had a couple scenarios in the past where I've had to not have my vehicle for a certain amount of time, and I'm able to run my years ago, I used to have a Chevy Traverse. That's when I started the business, and I did run my business out of the back of a Traverse for almost 2 full years before I ended up getting a truck. Now, the issue was that was still my home and work vehicle at the time, so if something happened to it, I was out of luck. This time, the truck, it had a service transmission light come on. Made an appointment. The earliest appointment I could get was Tuesday at about noon, and I knew that there's a possibility, obviously, that something could, it could need to get fixed, and that's going to take more time. I can't schedule work. Let me rephrase that. I could schedule work. I could schedule work, and I could make sure that I have my entire schedule packed. The problem is that if I do that, and I have to cancel an appointment, that's to me worse than not booking an appointment in the first place. My reputation is that I show up on time. Knock on wood, I've never been late to an appointment that I set. I always leave myself plenty of time to get there. I actually typically sometimes will get there 15 minutes early and just set a block down the road, messing with stuff on my phone prior to actually pulling up 5 minutes before, just because I don't like showing up late. I think I said this before, I'm ex-military. You get drilled in your head that if you're not early, you're late, and that is 100% how I like to run my business. But when I have outside circumstances that I can't control and I don't have any way of knowing how long it's going to take to get it resolved, I don't want to make appointments to have these issues come up. So Monday, I had absolutely nothing. Monday, to be clear, I had nothing, but it wasn't for any other reason than I just didn't. My kids didn't have school that day, so I spent time with my kids, and that was essentially my day. I did do stuff around my shop. I did do a lot of billing and invoices and stuff like that that I had yet to take care of. I also do all of my own accounting, so I had to take care of that. I will say, for some people, it's easier than you think. If you put some certain things in place, you'll figure it out. I'll talk about how I run my books and things like that on a future video that's not part of This Week in the Field, but specifically, let's talk about the rest of the week. So Tuesday, a couple weeks ago, I mentioned that I had an estimate that I did for somebody who was moving out of a property. It was like $2,000 worth of work. I needed to get over to this property because there was 2 things that I knew I was going to need to order. One was an Anderson window screen, because those are very specific metal frames. They're custom to the windows. And while I can make a custom frame, it's not necessarily like I can't make a sand tone, which is the color that most people in this area have if it's not white. And if it's a sand tone, I can't make a sand tone screen. I can rescreen one, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was that the screen frame itself was bent because they bent the screen so that they could get into the house when they locked themselves out of the house years ago, and now they're selling the house. So there was that, and then the other issue was that there was their patio door the lock is not turning, so the mechanism needs to be replaced. Well, the mechanism is not just a mortise lock, it's actually an entire passive entry lock where it has two clasps at the top and the bottom, so that when you engage the lock, it actually has three different points of contact to make sure that you can't get in. You see those on French doors sometimes, or higher end just entry doors that are they're not sliding doors, just so we're clear, this is an in-swing door. And because it's an in-swing door, you don't want to have a situation where someone is able to push the door open if they're trying to break in. That specific mechanism runs over $300, or about $300, $350, depending on which one you need. And that specific mechanism you have to order. So I needed to get, one, I was trying to avoid having to purchase that mechanism because it's so expensive if I didn't need to also save the customer some money. By messing with the mechanism and seeing if it was just catching or if it needed, maybe be, lubed up or something like that to make it work. So I needed that. I needed to get the screen, and then there was a piece of trim on a door that is damaged. That's the one unfortunate thing about all the new construction in our areas is all MDF. I really can't stand that. I have it in my own house, and it's not great. It gets damaged very easily. But they had this piece of door trim, they had this issue right here. So this needs to be replaced, but I'm replacing the whole piece. But there's also a piece of window trim that is the exact same profile. And there's also well, that's it. But I needed to get this specific profile so that I could find this specific trim. If anybody knows a great way of being able to find trim profiles very easily, I'd love to know, because it's one of the things I struggle with is, you get the profile like this, and most of the time it's, for baseboards, it's pretty straightforward. You're just looking for the height, and then you can kind of narrow it down. But for sometimes with the trim, it's just a slightly different profile than what you can readily get at the store, at a big box store, that is. So this was a quick trip. It was essentially, the other thing I needed to do was the seal around the garage door needed to be replaced. It was originally sand tone. The doors, she recently, over the summer last year, she had her garage doors painted a chocolate brown, but not this chocolate brown. It's slightly different. And then, so these are the three options of the seals you can get. So I wanted her to make a choice on which one she wanted. I knew she was going to choose white. All of the aluminum trim around the garage is all sand tone, so I figured that's what it was. But the issue is that this color sand tone is not the same as sand tone that's been sitting there for 15 years on aluminum that's been slowly, fading. So she needed to make a decision on that so that I would know exactly what it is, and then get those pieces ordered. So that was essentially Tuesday. It was a real quick. I was there for about 30 minutes, cut this piece of trim out, and then get those other things. The screen I took out, got the product number for the door to make sure that I could get the right parts, and then just ordered those parts. Took my truck to the shop. That was a fiasco. It had nothing to do with work, but I'll tell you anyway. When you have an extended warranty on your vehicle, you assume that everything's going to get taken care of. Apparently, and I'm sure this is common more than just where I'm at, but apparently transmission people are not very common. They're not something that, there's not a ton of them, I guess, that are trained on transmissions. So I took it to the dealership where I bought the car and bought the warranty and all of that, and told them about the light. They essentially said, okay, we'll have to have a transmission person look at it. And then I said, so I ended up, my appointment was at 12:30. I went in there at about 10:30 to try to hopefully drop it off early, so that way if they had an opening, they could get it in sooner. I needed to pick up my daughter from something at about 4 o'clock, and said to them, do you think you'll have an answer of what's wrong with it by 3? And she said, oh, absolutely not. We won't have an answer by then. And I was like, oh, okay. 5 hours or even 3 hours, if you go by my original appointment, you're somehow not going to have any answer. What's the point of making an appointment then? That was fun. By the end of the day, I still had no idea when I was getting my vehicle back, which means I was without the vehicle on Wednesday too. Wednesday morning, I was pretty upset about the fact that I hadn't heard anything, and they had the vehicle for almost 24 hours at this point. called the dealership. They ended up telling me that the vehicle, they were still trying to figure out what was wrong with it. Didn't specifically say they had any ideas other than they were trying to figure out what was wrong with it. I kind of made a stink about how I couldn't go without the vehicle for a longer period of time. Ultimately, if the vehicle needs some sort of major repair, then I need to arrange for a vehicle, you know, a separate vehicle to be able to continue to do my work, or I need to be able to, or I just need to plan my work accordingly. Now, conveniently, as you're watching this, the week after, right after this week, I'm going out of town for a week, which there won't be any overlap with the actual videos that I release because I'm trying to have episodes recorded ahead of time, so you're never going to see that I went on vacation. But I'm going out of town for a week, mostly because this is a slower time and it starts picking up as soon as March happens. So I purposefully planned this vacation knowing the last 2 years, the end of March, outside of if I had a bigger project that I was working on over an extended amount of time, I knew that this was going to be a slower time. And case in point, it was very slow. And then all of a sudden I start getting phone calls at the end of the week for a bunch of stuff that people want to get done because most people are starting to get their tax returns. And as soon as they start getting their tax returns and the weather starts warming up, between water penetrating places inside when there's the melt, or because they've got money from their tax return, you suddenly start having a lot more customers that want to get things taken care of. And this is when it starts to amp up and get busier. People with bigger projects start reaching out now, planning ahead for the summer, things like that. So all of that being said, I knew it was going to be slow, so I planned this vacation. So if my vehicle had to be in the shop for a week, let's say, to get fixed, then I'd like to drop it off before I go on vacation, not, you know, prior to vacation. I also had work scheduled for Thursday, and that was another concern of mine, was I didn't want to have a problem where I couldn't get the work done that I needed to get done on Thursday. They essentially said that they would hopefully have an answer soon. Within about an hour of that conversation, I had received a text message saying that the voltage in my truck, or the voltage in the battery, was low. They believed that was the issue. They wanted to replace the battery. Of course, replacing the battery was not covered under the warranty because I'm at 43,000 miles, and the bumper to bumper, which would have included the battery, ran out in 36,000 miles. Now, this vehicle is a 2023. I haven't even owned it for 3 years, but somehow the battery was bad. But I digress. Whatever. They replaced the battery. The battery is in the vehicle. They couldn't replicate any of the situations that the issues were, and said it was ready for pickup. So magically, after making a stink, an hour later, they knew what it was conveniently and could replace the battery in less than 30 minutes and have it ready to go. All that being said, picked up the truck. I needed to go over to my main property manager to pick up a set of keys to drop off for a job that I was doing on Thursday. And as I was backing out of the parking lot, the stupid service transmission notification came back on. So clearly it's not resolved. So, we'll figure that out. But as of right now, the thing is, it's popping on, it's popping off. It's not all the time. And the thing is, unless it becomes a bigger concern, I don't have the time to deal with it right this second. And I have some other ideas of maybe how to deal with it, but again, not my focus at this moment. So that was Wednesday. Thursday, the house that I went to a couple of weeks ago, and was the house that I went to a couple of weeks ago that was a little bit further out from my property manager. I went back there with the drawer front that I picked up last week. This was the beginning of last week that I was there. I ended up bringing that drawer front. There was something real small. There was missing a toilet paper, the little tube that you put the toilet paper in. That was missing, so I needed to put that in. And then I had these keys. And I just essentially had to make sure that the set of keys that the property manager made copies of worked. One set was for the mailbox, one set was for what was labeled as the utility room. I believe it was for a gate for a community pool, but we couldn't end up, I don't know if they changed the keys. The owner of the property, they mailed the property manager the keys, and then the property manager made copies, but I don't know what the situation was at the community pool. I don't know if those keys are supposed to be for the community pool or they're for something else, but needless to say, the tenant currently has those keys. And And that was that for that specific day. Now, on my way back from that location, the same property manager got in touch with me about another job that they needed done. They had a condo building in the complete opposite direction of where I was, and they were having issues with the door, the entry doors latching. These are cylinder locks where you turn the key and then it turns the lock and you just pull the door open. It's not like a doorknob or anything like that. It's, you know, the dead latch type locks. Asked if I could go do it yesterday. Unfortunately, I couldn't do it, but I said I would get to it right away on Friday, which I did. Went out there on Friday, met up with the condo president. He explained the issue, but then it was one door to two doors. Now, one of the things that I've learned to do recently is if I can't figure something out, as far as like I can't identify something, I try to use AI as much as I can. I knew what type of lock this was by looking at it. However, I didn't know the brand that was there. And I was trying to not replace everything. I asked for a picture from the property manager. He received a video that was in poor resolution. I could see what type of lock it was, but I couldn't tell what brand it was or anything like that. I haven't worked on enough of these to know specifically what it was. Asked for a picture, not a video, and got a picture, but of course it was from an angle where you couldn't actually see the mortise lock. It was just, you could see the handle, which the handle does me no good because handles are just handles. Of course, ChatGPT is telling me, oh, can you get a picture from the side so we can get maybe the logo of the company that makes the locks so we can figure it out. I knew I was going to end up having to get this from Grainger because that's the only place locally that you could typically get commercial stuff, and you just hope that they have it. I was trying to identify, because the problem is where this location was, there's not a Grainger close. Most of the Graingers from that specific location are like 30 minutes in different directions, and I was trying to not drive 30 minutes after driving 45 minutes to this location, which then becomes a problem because when you're driving a little bit further outside of your service area than you're used to, not used to, but you're normally driving, and then on top of that, you're doing something that requires diagnostic work, what would you do? Do you charge the property manager for the diagnostic work? If you don't do the repair, do you charge them for the diagnostic work, or do you not charge them? And I asked that honestly to get your guys' opinion because I've ran into this problem a couple of times, specifically with this property manager. Now, none of this is the property manager's fault, and I'm not trying to claim it's the property manager's fault. These are just unforeseen things that have occurred that I have to wonder if it was one of my customers, like a normal customer, I typically wouldn't charge because I have nothing to show for it. However, as this keeps happening with different situations with the property manager, I keep thinking I probably need to start charging because I can't keep doing diagnostic work only to not get paid. I'd like to hear what you guys, your guys' thoughts are on that, on what would you do in those situations where either you can't take care of something, or once you tell them how much it's going to cost based off your diagnostic work, the owner does not approve the work, and then you have nothing. They just basically say they're not going to do anything, and then what? What do you do then? It's not the property manager's fault to a certain degree. Obviously, they're sending me to the location, but it's not them who are deciding not to do the work. So what would you do? Curious to hear your thoughts. But essentially went out there, figured out exactly which lock it was, went on Grainger's website, and I will say it was an absolute pain because while I'm being told by ChatGPT that the latch itself is reversible, shouldn't be a problem no matter which one you get, on Grainger's website they have 4 different versions of the exact same thing, and every single one of them also says it's not hand specific, yet they have 4 different ones, and those codes for the different ones correlate to different hand, different swings. Not sure why that was. I have no idea why that's the case, especially because on their own website it said non-handed, so that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But long story short with that, they didn't have the part. They had one of the 2 latches I need, or the 2 mortise locks or latch, whatever you want to call them, that I needed. The issue was that the the one that I needed was a solid 45 minutes in the complete opposite direction of everything, and the other one they weren't going to have until Monday. Now, the unfortunate thing is, like I said, I'm going to be out of town, so there's nothing I can do about getting that part on Monday because I can't get over there. I tried to come up with some different solutions, but then I also was at the location for about an hour trying to figure out if there was anywhere else that I could get this thing quicker, because I'm literally leaving out of town tomorrow. So there's nothing I can do as far as that. Now, part of this is my fault, because if I could get the part by Monday, I could go back on Monday and take care of it, and there's no problem. But I can't. And I will say, getting at Grainger, it is more expensive than ordering on Amazon from a different supplier. But the problem is, on Amazon, it wasn't going to get here until the end of next week anyway, which I'll be back in town by the time it would come in, so it didn't matter. So I basically gave them the option of, I can do the one. It's not gonna be cheap because I have to, go up and get this part from the location. The issue was that with all the drive time and all of that, and then the cost of the material is gonna be like $480 to do one, just because of how far away this part was instead of just getting it shipped. So I gave them that option, said that if I only had to just get the item and then bring it back and do it, then it would just be $280 per lock. So essentially almost half as much as the original lock, or the original price if I was to do it the day of. They then decided to sit there and say they wanted to rig it up, or the president said he wanted to rig it up and just maybe make it so that the handle would actually engage the latch, so that the latch would lock whenever somebody would go in and out, which that was fine. But the simple solution for that was just taking some rubber bands and latching it up. Show some pictures of what I actually ended up doing, but it wasn't anything special. I'm not trying to claim it was special in any means, but the problem is that, again, my diagnostic was there. I was there for an hour trying to figure out the best solution, and ultimately I ended up giving them the idea of, well, if you contact a locksmith, there's a chance the locksmith might have the part in hand. Nobody else has the part in hand. And I'm not a locksmith, so I don't, even if I was a locksmith, I don't keep a lot of inventory. I have like a small container of like screws, nails, that kind of stuff, anchors, some electric wing nuts and things like that, stuff that I know that I would use on a regular basis if I needed to. But the problem is that's the most inventory that I actually have. I typically buy everything specifically for a job. I've said this before, but luckily I live very close to a Home Depot, so I can get stuff fairly easy. But that's essentially what the situation was. So they wanted to find out how much the locksmith was going to be, which I knew it was going to be more expensive than me, labor-wise, that is. However, if they had the part, then they get the they get the thing fixed, and whatever. I guess ultimately it didn't matter. They did have an approval amount of about $500, which I don't know if the locksmith would end up charging, more than that. I guess that's a good question. If anybody's watching who knows exactly roughly how much a locksmith would charge to replace 2 of those dead latches, I appreciate finding out. I do use a website called HomeWise to gauge prices for certain things, that's stuff that I don't typically do, but this was straightforward. I was only planning on charging my minimum per lock for this if I just was able to show up with the part ahead of time and put it in. I didn't know there was 2. I only thought there was 1. So literally it would have been my minimum, which is $150, and then it would have been the cost of the lock if I had to get it from Grainger, which I think with tax it was going to be like $130. So it would have been $280 for the door. If I had to do 2 doors, it probably would have been, it would have been pretty close. It actually probably would have been over 500 anyway, because it would have been, the second door would have been $250. It would have been a little bit less on labor because I was already obviously there. But yeah, but anyway, long story short, which it's not a short story, I guess, but essentially what we ended up doing was rigging it up. I took some pictures that if I needed to identify anything else, I had pictures. And then as I was taking pictures, I noticed that one of the screws on the mortise lock is completely stripped out, so that's going to be a pain to get that out. And on the other lock, one of the screw heads is completely broken off. So that one might not be so hard if you can actually get the lock out by disengaging the other screw and then just having to like twist out the, you know, the remainder part of the screw. But not an ideal scenario, and haven't heard anything back from the property manager, so I'm assuming that it's not happening, or they got a lock. I mean, it's not happening for me, and the locksmith is probably going to take care of it. But, you know, sometimes it is what it is. But like I said, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on what to do in the case of a property manager sending you for diagnostic stuff and then not being able to take care of it, or the owner choosing not to take care of it. What do you do in that regard? Because I can't keep doing that. If I did, like, let's just say on a grand scale, I get sent out 3 times a week to do that. That's a lot of time that's eating up into my schedule. So I have to get some recoup for that. I'll go over some of the other ones that they had sent me out to do. Those weren't in the same situation. But yeah, we'll cover that on a different time. But I'd love to know what you guys think on that. And that's essentially it. I'm going away for a week. Like I said, videos will stay on schedule because I tried to make sure that I had stuff recorded and edited so that the week that I'm on vacation, nothing happens. So the next time you see me, you'll have a normal video. Hopefully you guys checked out the last couple of videos of me talking about how I started my business, or I guess how my skills set led me to start my business. And then the next one that just released was me talking about some of the first jobs I started to do, and why I tried to deviate from that type of work very quickly. So hopefully you guys check those out. Like and subscribe. Greatly appreciate you guys. We'll see you guys next time.